I am Livia Pineng, Digital Professor for Research at the Digital Fashion Group Academy, and this is the Metaverse, where fashion and gaming collide, a live webinar hosted by the Digital Fashion Group Academy and Parcels and Ventures. Good morning, New York. Good afternoon, London, Porto, Paris, and Stockholm. And good evening, Hong Kong. This is the second of a series of webinars about the interactions of fashion in the Metaverse. You can watch the first one on our website. And we have the privilege to have here, for the second time, Mr. Richard Hawks from BNV in Hong Kong. Good evening, Richard. Good evening.
Glad to be back, Livia.
Thank you. And good afternoon to our participants in Europe. Daniela Loftus in London from This Outfit Does Not Exist. Hi, Danny.
Hi, Livia.
And Louis Jaroszewski from Platform E and the Digit, based in Portugal, but now he is in Brazil. Hi, Louis.
Yes. Hi, Livia.
Wow. And from Paris, we have Alexis Arragon from Skinvaders. Salut, Alexis, and thank you for joining us.
Bonjour, Livia. Thank you.
And to complete your panel, we have William Easton from the Future Games in Sweden. How are you, William? Thank you so much for joining us.
Very well. It's beginning dark here already. So just to give you an idea, I'm far north.
Yeah, and I'm in Portugal. We have a very, very bright, sunny day today. Looks like summer. I hope you can join us in this wonderful weather. So also with us in the audience, also in Portugal, we have the founder of the Digital Fashion Group, Sean Childs, and Leslie Holden. You're the founder of the Digital Fashion Group in Brussels. Also from the audience, we have from Parsons and Ventures, Deborah Gibb, Alexis Arragon, and Giselle Morel. Hello to you all, and thank you for being here. I'm eager to listen to our participants today, and let's keep this introduction short and sharp, starting with some provoking ideas. There is a cultural anthropologist called Roy Wagner, who wrote in 1975 that when two cultures collide, the outcome is the invention of a new one. This new culture will bring together aspects from both of the original cultures, but with its own symbols, language, and practice. When we are talking about fashion and gaming in the Metaverse, we're also talking about two different cultures. So there is a collision coming up. From this perspective, and what is this new culture that we are inventing right now? Which aspects, and from each of our original cultures, fashion and gaming and tech, are we bringing together to this new culture, and which aspects do we want to carry on with us? Does it make sense? That's why we have these 5 amazing participants in here from different backgrounds in fashion, gaming, and tech to help us to consider this new culture. Shall we? So let me start with something that is pretty similar for both cultures, and I would like to ask about that for Danny. Danny, I have been reading about digital fashion in the Metaverse as a way of escapism. From a generation that is living on the edge, financially and socially pressed by the pandemic and everything else that was already happening before. And this generation specifically, talking about that, we are talking about millennials and early Gen Z, would have found comfort in forms of escapism through digital fashion and gaming. So, but isn't traditional fashion already a form of escapism? How is that different? And from your designer's perspective, it is escapism or an aesthetics based on escapism that it now has found in the Metaverse, like this perfect media to be developed?
Really, really interesting question, Livia. And I completely agree. You know, for me, fashion has always been a form of escapism. I think what digital fashion really changes is, first of all, the parameters to how escapist you can be when it comes to your creativity. So, you know, in the digital world, you can have a dress that's on fire or looks like it's constructed from fairy liquid. And that obviously then enhances your ability to experiment with creativity. Secondly, it's the vessel you use to wear that digital fashion and how that facilitates escapism, which also fits into the spaces that you wear those clothes within. So in the physical world, I might wear, you know, a very avant-garde dress, but it's still tethered to my physical form. I have been born with a set of predetermined biological characteristics. You know, maybe I could wear a Balenciaga face covering and, you know, hide that, but ultimately there is a degree to which I'm tethered. Whereas when you enter the virtual world, your avatar is essentially completely constructed by you. It can look however you want and it can express anything that you feel the need to express. I think thirdly, it's the pure fact that digital fashion, the majority of digital fashion with, price tags which will traditionally for, let's say, a gorgeous ball gown be lower than their physical counterparts, increases the accessibility of those who can escape. So it isn't just people in the higher echelons of society, it can be anybody. And then kind of the fourth and final one, I think, which I found very interesting over the past couple of months with the people that I've spoken to, is the fact that there are a lot of people who are turning to digital fashion and virtual environments because their physical environments may not allow them to express themselves in the way that they would like. So, take certain countries where there's degrees of transphobia or homophobia, people can go into virtual worlds and feel the freedom to dress the way that they wouldn't feel comfortable dressing on the streets. And also, dressing to a degree has a lot to do with adjusting and appropriating to the space that you're in. And there might not be spaces near you where you can acclimatize to that through wearing a certain outfit, but you can enter into digital spaces where those things fit in and those things are aligned and those things feel comfortable. So I think those are kind of the way that digital fashion really enhances this escapist aspect.
Great, thank you, Danny. And also just to remind the audience that we will be discussing this for 45 minutes, and then we will open the Q&A session. So you can send us your questions in the Q&A here on Zoom. Thank you again, Danny. And now to William. Where digital is concerned, the fashion industry has traditionally focused primarily on tools needed for 3D modeling. And the game industry has treated fashion as a static establishment, as we were talking. How can we reimagine this relationship?
Well, it's a very, very big question, to be quite honest. Games are considerably more complex than just simply a kind of a form of display. It's a lot more than that. I did a little bit of research for this. I'm sure you guys know a great deal more, but I looked at the history of the catwalk and the runway, and I was looking at what people were doing in the beginning of the 20th century and stuff. And there's a lot more interactivity than I thought there would be. There was a lot more things happening than simply just showing things off. But as soon as we enter into the kind of game space, we're talking about play. We're talking about gameplay, and in terms of the kind of context, you immediately open up for things like narrative, storytelling. You open up the whole possibility of what an environment can be, what characters can be, and what is the actual form of play itself. You also have a kind of conjunctural aspect as well. You suddenly open up time. A casual game can take 20 minutes, but you can play a game for a day, a week, a month, years. So you had another whole kind of time frame. You also open up immediately for community and interactivity, which it's a totally different kind of thing. And the pandemic has revealed that games are considerably more complex than just like first-person shooters. They deal with these high levels of complexity of community. And then you also have this, I think, which is really the exciting aspects of the development of what's happening in games. And you have the user-generated content, so people aren't just the passive consumers, they're actually contributing to the actual thing itself. In terms of the kind of tools relationship to games, there has been a tendency, a lot of kind of digital, the way that other things are entered into the games is that they're trying to mirror or make a kind of simulation or a simulacrum of what we already have in the real world and bring it into the games. So you kind of make a mirroring of something else. But the space of the metaverse allows you to change physics. You don't have to have the same gravity or friction or any of these other kind of constraints. So you open up a whole new world. Thirdly, I think you have this capacity to really rethink identity, and character, where bodies are not held. And I think it's exactly the same point that's just been made. Your body is no longer confined by the constraints of the human condition. And lastly, and I think we probably will talk about this more, is actually the notion of economy. And whether we talk about the blockchain and that whole how that's going to change it in NFTs, that's one aspect of it. But the whole concept of an economy changes the nature of it increases the level of complexity of what we're talking about. And an economy is not just about the transfer of money, it's about the transfer of other forces. So we are looking at a radically new space that we're going to enter in the metaverse, which is going to be driven by other economies, not just the financial ones. So to put all that together, I would say it adds a level of complexity that is truly staggering and is going to be very, very exciting to watch. I kind of agree with the kind of William Gibson thing that the future's already here. It's just not very well organized, and we're already in the metaverse. We just need to actually start seeing how it's going to be applied. So, yeah, that would be my thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. And now moving to Louis, who is a fashion designer trainer traditionally and a longtime gamer as well. Recently, Matthew Drinkwater, the head of innovation of the Agency of London College of Fashion, in a recent post on LinkedIn, he drew attention to the limitless opportunities for creativity in the metaverse. Going beyond commercial and brand purposes, where do you see potential for fashion designers in the gaming industry, and how fashion designers can impact gaming aesthetics, for example? There is space for doing that?
Yeah, great question, Livia. And as a fashion designer, I always look at games from these both shoes that I feel in, from the both cultures where I'm within. Game culture and the fashion design space. And I actually entered into the fashion design school 11 years ago because of gaming, because I saw the narratives, the fantasy of the gaming world. I would play video games and then draw these amazing characters and the outfits that they would wear. So it was almost like a getaway of expressing myself artistically, what I was absorbing from the game universe into fashion. So for me, that's where fashion and game collide in that sense. But as you said, like one thing that, as a gamer now, talking as a gamer, one thing that has been bothering me lately, that this collision between fashion and games are sticking too much around product plugs. And for the gamers, this is quite not interesting or very meaningful approach to interact with fashion within video games, because gamers they just want to play video games to have fun, to be entertained, and to immerse themselves in a narrative that the game developers create. And then when I talk to game developers or game publishers about, is there a space for fashion designers within a game publisher agency? And they say that usually they don't work with fashion designers. And I think that's the problem when I play most of the video games, that I see that the narrative, it breaks. Because you see that sometimes garments are not well represented how they should be, and then the narrative breaks, the immersion breaks. You see that the drape doesn't flow well, or if a game developer imagines a game that's set in a future like in 2050, they create this very futuristic narrative that's completely crazy, doesn't really make sense. And then the fashion designers, they have this sense of, they know the history, how fashion was back then. They understand the zeitgeist, how the trends are developing right now. And they already sense, they have these antennas that they can sense and predict the futures because they're always connecting, immersing in this zeitgeist and studying about it. So they can even predict, okay, how like a cotton fabric would be like in 50 years from now, how fabrics it will be wearing fabrics. So this is a discussion that always the fashion designers, they have in mind, and they could bring to the game agencies, the game publishers as well, to enrich this immersion and narrative. So every production needs a costume department, and while the developer has a talented team of designers on their own, offering to work with a game studio on clothing that they will use to populate this world that they create could lead to amazing collaboration. And the only case, unfortunately, the only case that I've seen this happening successfully is with the Hirosan Hook from Acronym. He created the costumes for the game Deus Ex, The Mankind Divided, and also Death Stranding, most recently. And then when you play those games, as a fashion designer, but the game audience in general, you can see that there was a study behind the garments. you actually play the game wanting to acquire and buy the garments that the characters use on this game, because they seem wearable, they make sense to the context they are created in. But unfortunately, there's still, like, in the game publishing space, they are not reaching out to fashion designers. And when we consider also that most of the fashion students that are getting out of the school have like thousands and thousands of fashion students getting out of school every year, there won't be much space for work in the fashion industry, traditional side of fashion industry. So looking at the gaming as a new platform to create fashion garments or just wearables that express identity, or a way we can communicate on the so-called metaverse, could open a new professional era for the fashion designer. So there's definitely a space. We just need more interaction between the traditional fashion designers and the game studios to create these amazing collaborations.
Perfect. And now to Alexis. Now that from a different perspective, how do you see this from the tech perspective, right? How do you see this collaboration in terms of employment spaces and the development of careers and this intersection between gaming and fashion? You are coming from tech and gaming, now working in fashion. And how can we integrate those careers with a positive impact for the industry?
There's so much to do. And I think what Louis and William before just mentioned is a great example of how close the game and the fashion industry could be, but how big is the gap between those two at the moment. I come from the game industry, you're right. I was trained into that space because that's where I wanted to work as a kid, as a teenager. And I picked my studies just to do that. And at that time, there were no schools to learn about how to make games. And it was really a difficult struggle to get into those studios, because the studios would ask for previous experience before you would start working. Now, in France, that I know of, there are a lot of schools that train young students to game development or game artist roles, because the industry is so large that it needs this new generation of designers, of developers. And the industry is so well going at the moment that it needs new people to enter every year in the studios and to become the production force behind the games. Still, as Louis just explained very well, those people are not trained in fashion design. A game is very complex. There are probably hundreds of different expertise and role involved in a game, and a game can be done only in maybe a couple of years, sometimes more, for the largest games, because it's so difficult and so complex that for the biggest ones, the developers and the artists will work for a couple of years on just one garment or one character from end to finish. And it's the complexity that is needed in order to see the quality of the production that we are used to. Still, there are some studios or some people that by taste, by personal taste or desire, get accustomed or want to learn more about what is fashion design, how clothes are to be designed in the traditional sense, because they understand that it brings value to their own expertise, even if it remains in the digital space. And similarly, I think slowly we will see the same happening for fashion designers. 2 years ago, when I started working in the digital fashion space, I would have thought that there would be almost all fashion schools training new students into 3D design, but it's still not the case. And as we were saying as well, there will be few positions for those fashion students in the traditional space. So I think we need first fashion students to be trained into 3D design, that's for sure, and also trained at some point into the creation of digital designs. I had the chance to work very recently with IFA, so the International Fashion Academy based in Paris. And I taught a group of students who are doing their MBA about what does it mean to do fashion in 3D? What does it mean to do digital fashion? So those students had only just learned about fashion design in 3D very recently. They didn't have a long experience in that matter, but still I was here to teach them about how to do fashion design in 3D in a game. So you keep on piling up layers of complexity on top of each other. And even the basic facts to teach them about how 3D works in computers, how it is different in a game than it is in a design tool that they have been using. I could see on their faces at first that it was such a different world that they didn't understand why there would be this different, why it wouldn't be more simple or more straightforward to take a garment, redo the pattern in a software, and then export this 3D design into a game. But it doesn't work like that, because those are two industries that have that are very old and that require specific expertise to build and to connect to each other. So I think we're still in the infancy of this new gap, of this new combined culture between the games industry and the fashion industry. And for sure, we will need to maybe teach a new breed of fashion designers, a new breed of game designers, so that they take the best of those two domains, and that they come up with new roles, new expertise that will allow us to take to new limits.
Precisely. As you said, it's a full of layers complexity issue. And to add another complex layer to that, Richard, from the business perspective, how should we train the future generation to work in the metaverse, to work with fashion and gaming? Which skills from gaming and fashion design can be combined? And what is the industry looking for?
Well, as we've just heard from Alexis and Louis, the gap is huge. And it's getting smaller, but we're still a long way from it, because you've got this complete contrast between fashion design, truth and beauty, aesthetics, detail, and gaming design, which essentially comes down to scalability and minimizing things as much as possible so that you can do real-time animation and the like. So the two things are very disparate. It's quite interesting hearing what both the guys have just said, because I actually sense it getting closer, but the way you've described it, when you're actually on the front line talking to students and talking to gaming companies, it does seem that they are a long way apart. But that does reflect exactly what we're going through at the moment. So we are, as a company, our mission is to take brands into the metaverse. So that's done through a combination of NFTs and utility within those NFTs that can then be translated into gaming environments. So what we're doing at the moment is we're creating that workflow, that pipeline that goes from a beautiful CLO created product and converting it down to a game-ready version, whether that's for Unreal or Unity or a combination of each of those. So you're going from sometimes 6 million polygons to 6,000 polygons. And that's a big compression. And our job is to try and manage that process so that it still looks good. So you're not going from a beautiful, like I say, high resolution product to a voxelated Lego type, but to something that could actually be worn in a metaverse type environment in Unreal or potentially Unity. And those things, they are coming. They don't exist yet, but they're definitely in the pipeline. There's metaverses which are being built in Unreal, which is going to give true utility for fashion in the metaverse. I think when it comes to the educational side of it, and what are the skill sets that are needed in digital fashion, I still think there's the the core of fashion design. So understanding pattern and cut and materials and fabric and construction, as well as an overall design concept, is really important. I don't think it's easy for people to just come in and go, I have no knowledge of fashion design per se, but I'm going to be a fashion game designer. That's probably what's been happening, is there are people who have gone into the gaming world and have been said, right, you're on buildings, you're on experiences, you're on fighting equipment, oh, and you can be the fashion person. So what we've got to do is still create beautiful fashion, but then convert it into the gaming engines. And I see it very much that it's not necessarily, you don't need to go into gaming and understand everything about gaming. I was talking with, so I work with a guy called Aaron Vestig in Holland. I'd like to think he's one of the best in the game in terms of creating 3D real-time product. And one of his points was, you don't need to know all of this. If you're a fashion designer looking to work in the gaming world, probably the main thing you need to understand is rigging. How do you take an outfit and fit it on an avatar and maintain some of the things that Louis was mentioning, like drape and physics and all of the other bits that come through? You don't have to understand every single thing about Unreal Engine. You need to understand the bits that are relevant to fashion. So, and quite a lot of that is accessible. You know, you don't have to necessarily, you can learn it on the job or freelance, so to speak. And I think the other thing that I wanted to just sort of touch on is I see the gaming engines as a means to an end for fashion. So fashion doesn't have to be part of a game. It can be using the tools that the gaming industry creates to create other experiences. So people don't necessarily want to wear a Balenciaga couture piece while they're running around shooting their friends. You know, but there's other instances where they would actually just want to hang out with them in a metaverse type environment, read a book, drink a coffee, talk about the weather. That type of thing is where the gaming engines, I think, are going to be much more relevant to fashion. So gaming per se is one part, but the gaming engines interconnected with really good avatars and really good fashion is where the future should be. And that's where I would be steering the fashion students is, okay, work with digital fashion tools, you know, the CLOs, the Browseware, the Optitex. You can make your choices of what's available. I'm not going to preach one over the other, but also get to understand a bit more about how you can translate those into the other gaming engines. And there's no button you can press. There's no algorithm that goes from this to this. It's still a very complicated process. And I think it's probably going to be another 2 years before that click of a button will take you from one to the other. It will happen because everybody's going to be working on it because they know it needs to happen. We're doing what we need to do ourselves for now. But I think, you know, we'll come up with our solution, but there will be other solutions coming down the line.
Exactly. It's a good way of seeing it. And now to go like another round to all the participants and thinking about this, how these two cultures are coming together. And we understand there is this huge gap between the two industries right now, but we are, as Richard was just saying, we are approaching one to each other. So what should we take with us from our original cultures, like or fashion or gaming and tech, to this new culture, to this intersection? Like, for instance, Louis, which aspects of traditional fashion design training would you like to keep with you in this future scenario? Like we're talking about draping. Like, what is the importance of taking with us these a few characteristics of both cultures?
Yeah. One thing that as a fashion designer that would enter soon into the gaming space as a fashion game designer, I will not disconsider everything that I learned on the traditional side, because this is a great input to improve the game experience, as I just said. But I also would like to see from the game publishers positions like that being announced as like we are hiring a fashion design for our studio, because I've done a lot of research, actually for this webinar this week, and I didn't see anything. Usually they work with a character designer that will do everything around creating the image, the identity of the character. And when I talk to the these designers that work within gaming, they say that they have to do everything. They have to work on the fashion, they have to work on the character, they have to work on architecture to create the buildings and the world. So they have to do everything. And I think it will be very good to bring the professionals for each area to tap in or give training to these designers to improve the game experience. Also, one thing that the fashion designers, they bring to the gaming space is this social cultural biases that we have, that we learn in school how to deal with. And then the game space lacks a lot, leading a lot to misleading game design, especially when there's this generalization that the game audience is predominantly male, young, cisgender, and there's this idea that they should create fashion to appeal to this audience, which fashion designers could help fix this. Because we've seen in the past, for like if you play games like Resident Evil, Jill Valentine in the early 2000s, she was a police officer, she was a cop in a narrative fighting zombies, but she was wearing a miniskirt with a barely there top. And that's what was the fashion within the game. So fashion designers could tackle these issues that happen in the game space as well. Not to mention all the study behind ergonomics, physics, the drape that I just mentioned. And also, I think we should, when thinking about like a brand looking into explore the gaming world, we should look less about exploring this as a media outlet and a market activation point, like a brand activation space, because the gamers, they sense that. And that happened in the case with the Balenciaga. It caused a lot of hype, it got them press, but in the game, what does it add? It's just like extending your physical wardrobe into the metaverse or into the digital world. But ultimately, what the gamers want is to have fun. And brands that have adopted this strategy very well was Wendy's and Marvel with the Fortnite activation that they did. And they did that in a very fun way. And they didn't worry about branding and things like that. They just made the experience in Fortnite more fun. Obviously, there's these games, or I would say more apps, which even like Skinvaders, Alexis can tell more about it, like Zepeto. Where is the metaverse? It's about identity, it's about interacting with other people. So it's less about gaming and more about, socializing in a digital space. And then their fashion makes sense. So it's interesting to have a brand in this digital space. But when I play, for example, Assassin's Creed, The Last of Us, I don't really see branded skins in there. But then as a fashion designer, I look at the garments and I imagine, wow, when I play The Last of Us, this looks real accurate because it's a devastated world that it's being in a like zombie holocaust for 50 years. So how would garments behave in a decaying world? So I see that there's a lot of study that they did there to simulate how the fabric would decay, how the leather would fade, how the cotton would behave in a very almost unlivable world. And then when I do the photographic shots of the game, I can see the details. And I know that there's fashion people behind it because I see the stitching, I see the threads, I see how the twill behave on the garment. When there's rain, how the garment gets wet, how it behaves. So fashion designers bring all this knowledge of how garments work in the real world to the game to make the experience more immersive and more seamless.
Absolutely. And I would like to ask the same question to Danny, because I saw you were eager to talk about it. Which aspects of the fashion culture do you want to bring to the metaverse?
So interesting. And I think, Lou, you made some really, really brilliant points. I think it's, I think it's that creativity, yes. But what I also want to see in this is to do with kind of what I would call like really original fashion culture. The fashion culture that I grew up with would be like, Vivienne Westwood bootstrapping a shop on the King's Road, and fashion really being representative of those little cultural movements, and young designers being able to have the accessibility and the roots to participate in fashion and in those cultural movements. So what I think is very exciting is the way that I view games is I view them as their own little cultural hubs. And I think as we move into a metaverse and a world that's more conjoined, you'll have these little cultural hubs within a larger realm. And what I would love to see is fashion designers who represent that culture, or maybe like working in a specific world, maybe you like working something that's voxelized, maybe you like working something that's ultra high def, really tailoring their creations to those environments, and also having low enough barriers to entry where people can create. So as I'm sure everyone knows, very, very high sunk cost of starting out as a fashion designer. You need to invest in materials. You need to get exposure from mainstream fashion weeks and the mainstream fashion press, and it's incredibly difficult. Whereas with digital fashion, and that's both in-game fashion and UGC, but also phygital fashion, you can invest in the cost of a GPU and close software and be able to already start getting your designs on people at a much lower cost, and then have algorithmically assisted exposure. And so I really want the metaverse to bring digital fashion to its kind of creative pinnacle, both in terms of the technologies used, but also in terms of allowing the space to become more accessible to the emerging designers doing those really exciting things.
Yes, absolutely. And now, like the not so good aspects, like which aspects we don't want to carry with us, sustainable aspects, for instance. We know the struggle that we have been discussing, how blockchain and solutions as it, they're not actually that sustainable as everybody's talking about. So thinking about these issues on our culture, or current culture, or our industry, which of these you don't want to carry with you? How to change it?
Well, I think the blockchain thing is really, obviously it's very, very important. I think what is very exciting is the speed of acceleration of change in technology can always be 100 times faster than that of the physical supply chain in fashion. Fashion's been unsustainable ever since it was industrialized. It's been a problem for years. Whereas, blockchain obviously started around 2013, 2014. The NFT craze hit around a year ago. And as soon as the environmental backlash started happening, sustainable chains started springing up, and work is already being done in that space. So, one of the things we obviously have to deal with is massive amounts of electricity consumption, both in terms of blockchain and in terms of wider computing power. I think that's going to decrease, and there will be those innovations. And I think what I find really exciting from a sustainability perspective about digital fashion is that it doesn't ask the consumer mindset to change. We've been conditioned, and in our society are conditioned to want to change our identity very regularly. That's what fashion is based around. And the slow fashion movement is obviously absolutely brilliant, but it asks you to fight the desire to change your identity, the constant advertising you experience, and also just as a human being, as you grow and evolve, to not want to express yourself in terms of your aesthetics in different ways. Whereas with digital fashion, you can transfer that conspicuous consumption, that desire to transfer your identity to the digital realm. And so it's not asking you to change your mind massively. It's just asking you to redirect your behaviors online. And as we move towards a society where the culture you consume, the people you hang out with, all of the signaling in terms of your affiliations is just happening in a virtual plane. I think that's a really exciting way that sustainability can kind of come into it. And I think, as I was saying before, one of the things that I really want to and hopefully work to make sure happens is that we don't see a replication of characteristics that we do in the physical fashion industry, where a few or 20 large brands are those that succeed at the expense of smaller entrants. And it's incredibly exciting that Dolce & Gabbana and Balenciaga are going into the metaverse, because it demonstrates to everybody that it is a very important space, and it's really going to, in my opinion, accelerate the speed at which people are going into it. But I don't want to just see this space being dominated by large brands as we do in the physical world, when it's, this unique opportunity. And especially when you look to like Web3 fashion and blockchain-based fashion that's coming from the bottom up, you see this amazing ability for revolutionary transformative potential in terms of sustainability that relates to people and the profit they receive. And kind of the final thing that I'll say around that is there's a big issue in the fashion industry with equity. So the person who makes all the money is, the brand slapping the label on the garment, not the workers who are creating everything from the beginning of the supply chain to, the people working in the fashion houses. It's the people at the top who basically monetize from the creations. Whereas using blockchain-based digital fashion and NFTs, you can program equity into the actual garment. So, I could make a digital fashion NFT and you could make the print and I could make the form of the garment. And in both primary and secondary sales, we would be fairly rewarded consistently for our efforts. And I think that's a real game changer, and it also incentivizes collaboration in the space.
Exactly. This is what I was going to ask to Richard, because we know how much collaboration is important in this field, and especially as Danny was saying, and all the main aspects of having the NFTs and the blockchain about being decentralized. And we can see that gaming is coming in the gaming industry. This is something that's already happening, like different business models, subscriptions models. How can we bring that to fashion and actually have this equity, more equality situation to fashion?
It's tricky. I think what Danny said is exactly the reason when I started looking into blockchain application to fashion, particularly with NFTs in mid 2019, was, wow, this can change the way people get rewarded. So you have a freelance designer which may get paid a few $100s for a particular project, and then they never see anything after that. But if you can lock them into a smart contract and they're rewarded based on the success of that item, whoever owns the actual brand IP is an absolute game changer. And you can bring in the marketing people, you can bring in the promotional. So that is absolutely crucial, in my opinion, to Web 3.0 stroke NFT stroke rewards. I think that's a really important part of it. I think part of the problem that we're probably facing and likely to face is we've been talking about gaming. And at the moment, the gaming platforms are closed shops. They're basically making their money through selling, or as some people would say, renting skins or wearables that you can only use within those devices. They're not desperately opening up their doors to outside NFTs coming in. So individual designers having their product transferable into a closed gaming world is going to be tough. So I think what's going to be really interesting is how we make sure, that those big corporations, whether they be the gaming people, or we don't end up with the Microsoft metaverse or the Facebook metaverse. And it has to be open, it has to be decentralized, and there has to be interoperability and transferability across whatever gets built. And I think I feel pretty confident that what's happening at the moment, the major players that are building things are very much coming from this decentralized perspective, and they are building things with that in mind. I'm just always nervous that some other people are going to come in and try and own the metaverse, which is the antithesis of what it should be. I think if you talk about issues that we need to probably just be aware of, that would be top of my list. I think the sustainability issues, as Danny mentioned, they will get resolved. They're being resolved every day. The cost of producing tokens and blockchain interaction is going to be almost minimal within a relatively short space of time. And you can then when you look at that, the cost of producing a digital item versus a real item in the real world, there's not going to be a comparison. It's going to be so small. So I think to me, the whole issue of who's going to run the metaverse is going to be a key question.
And a very important question. Another very important question now open our Q&A session that came from Betty Zhang. Betty is asking, both gaming and fashion industries share a high barrier of entry characteristic. How can we make them, or the combination of them, more accessible for more people? I think William can help us with that.
I'm not sure. Well, I hope I can. I mean, one of just the education part. Well, I've been working in education since 1984, and one thing I have learned is that students are extremely conservative. And one of the issues I have constantly with my game students is that they imagine the world they're going to enter into according to what they've already experienced by playing games themselves. I imagine fashion students do exactly the same thing. They experience the future of fashion in terms of what they already know about fashion themselves. What we're confronting in the metaverse is nothing to do with games. Games is one aspect of it. It cannot be proprietary. It cannot take on that role if it's going to be a metaverse. Otherwise, it's just going to be, as I think Richard said, it's going to be a Twitterverse or a Googleverse or whatever else it's going to be. That has got nothing to do with what we're really talking about. I think the real point we have to emphasize here is how we shift. To make a game requires a group project. There's no question. It's 10 or 11 people, even for a simple game to put together. You don't have auteurs. You don't have individuals who are, who can direct the entire thing. So one of the big challenges is going to be how fashion students and game students can work together and recognize their own roles in a larger project. That is a huge step for all of them. So I'm not sure I'm really answering your question, but I do think that what we're recognizing increasingly from the games perspective is an increasing specialization inside the production of games, which in itself creates a problem in terms of like the generalists. How are people actually learning to enter into that space? So I don't know if that really answered the question. One thing I would say is that, we use this industry standard tools in game training, like agile training, Scrum, Kanban, all that kind of stuff, because it's the only way, that's the only way you can produce a game. You can't do it any other way. They have to learn those skills. I wonder whether, in fashion schools, they would be, if they would adapt to accept those kinds of, project management skills as being essential to the future of production. I wonder. We have just pitched with the Digital Fashion Group, a thing for the EU funding for a 2-year project to link fashion schools and game schools together. So it's the Fashion Design Group, it's the Beckman School of Fashion Design in Stockholm, it's the Warsaw Film School, and it's others, to try and see if we can get students together to try and make something. But honestly, I think the two cultures have to learn a lot from each other and abandon a lot of their kind of like what they've been carrying for a long, long time if they're going to make this happen. They've got to kind of give up this idea that they are the sole player in making something. They've got to open themselves up to genuine collaboration and what that actually means. You can't make complex things. Doesn't matter whether it's a game or a space in the metaverse, unless you are absolutely collaborating with programmers and designers and the whole sphere, QA, marketers, the whole span of that stuff. And that is a challenge for education right across the board. Doesn't matter whether it's fashion or game. So I don't think I answered your question, but I threw that in anyway.
Thank you. I think you threw another layer to that. But it's not when we're talking about the industry and fashion and gaming industry, we're not talking exactly only about designing it. It's like fashion. You don't need to be a fashion designer to work in fashion.
Right.
There are many roles you can play in this field. And the same happens with tech. You don't need to be. I work in tech for the last 12 years, and I never study technology specifically. Right. I'm an anthropologist. So I think in this kind of entry level, which skills we want from these professionals, that is not exactly, of course, the traditional design skills are very, very important. We already talked about that. But we have all this set of skills, as we were talking about, project management and even marketing and other areas. And which are the areas that you believe that will be helpful to join these cultures as well?
Can I just add something to William's question? Because I'm actually working on a particular project now, and I'm very much, agile scrums, Kanban boards, with Trello, Miro, we've got all sorts of them, and it's driven very much by the tech team. So the UI, the UX, the engineers, the coders, etc. But we are trying very much to merge that with our creative teams as well, and try and get them to you can't rein creativity in, but you can try and corral it. You can steer it in the right direction. And I've been trying to do this for 5 years, since I worked on a project with a design school in Hong Kong, where we brought the animation students with the fashion students together, and it was just a fight. It was, you literally had to go in and separate people at one time. But I can see now in recent weeks and recent months, as people from the creative side of the fashion industry going, okay, I understand now why we need to meet these deadlines and do this on time, because that won't work without this. And I think I can see it becoming a real a merger of those tools of discipline which are necessary when it comes to tech and therefore in gaming into the fashion area. It's hard because most people are really creative when you just leave them alone and give them enough rope. And sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't, but inevitably that's the way it works. But to try and get people to work within that framework is quite a tough one, but I can see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I totally agree. I mean, there's going to be a conflict, but we shouldn't be frightened of that conflict. I mean, it's a terribly exciting thing to see. I think, when I look at game artists, clearly, or narrative designers, or people working within music in relationship to games, they come out of a creative field. But they have to work within this kind of processes of working together. So I think it's been happening in the games industry, but as I said, I think the games industry itself is extremely young and extremely unformed, and it still doesn't quite know what it wants or how to organize itself. So it's also this kind of like open field of where things can emerge. The fashion industry is thousands of years old, so there's a kind of different kind of weight to that. So the games industry is open for adaptation to a very large degree because it doesn't quite know what it wants to do. No two game studios have the same titles for the people who work there. They don't even know the names who goes into a team. They don't have the same organization structures. There's no similarity between even the bigger studios. So it's an open field where I still think there's a lot of kind of possibility for new ways of working to come in. So I'm very optimistic about this actually. But I do think that we have to really, I have to work a lot from my side in trying to convince my students to think that the future of the metaverse is not just going to be about trying to apply things within the gaming sphere. It's what's going to be happening in fashion. It's what's going to happen in architecture. It's what's going to be happening in city planning. It's what's happening in automotive. It's what's happening in business. It's what's happening in all these areas. So it's a much bigger question. I also think, quite genuinely, if we look at the history of technological development, you have these moments where these kind of epistemic shifts take place. The metaverse is one of those. And if you look at, say, something like the creation of, I don't know, movable type or the creation of film, the first things that created within those spaces are pretty awful, actually. They're not that great. And a lot of hucksters get into the business and try and milk it for as much as they can. We're going to have some blockchain bubbles bursting within 6 months. We're going to have some metaverse crashes within a year. Absolutely guaranteed. But the other side of it is that it's very quickly, we look at the film industry, by the time of the invention of film, so the first great films is quite short, and technology is moving faster than it's ever moved before. So I think we're going to see some high quality materials produced very quickly. And I think these bubbles will burst. I think there will be some real, there's going to be some major players who are going to realize that their business models are fundamentally wrong. I do not think we're going to be paying for, people to give up their identity in order to enter the metaverse. I do not think we're going to ask people to just to use eyeballs as a measure of business success. I think these models are dead, and the metaverse will kill them off eventually. But there's going to be a nasty bit in between that where people are going to try and milk it for as much as they can. I think it's going to be a disaster if companies like Microsoft dominate the space, try and dominate the space with one proprietary model. It's not going to be the future. I mean, we're talking about the future of something as dramatic as the creation of movable type. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're going from like written books to printed books. The possibility of something like translation was created by movable type. There were translators before movable type. There were translations after we had printing. That's the kind of things we're talking about. So it's incredibly exciting, and we have to be prepared that we're going to have this clashes of culture. It's going to be very messy for quite a while. But I do actually believe, I genuinely believe there's going to be real quality emerging quite soon out of these spaces. that was a rant, and also a hopefully optimistic rant, though.
Of course, always finishing up optimistic. So we have more 3 minutes. Does anyone want to add something to William's excitement? End of our discussion.
I just wanted to add that, like, that there is this challenge, but I think that the challenge is totally doable, because we see the bridge between, like, the gaming industry and the film industry actually merging. If you see the AAA games, how they are developed, they do motion capture, they hire professional actors, there's scripting, there's the storytelling, the narrative are all done with the knowledge they get from the film industry. And I think that recipe can be replicated on the collaboration with fashion industry and fashion designers. And yeah, then for fashion designers, as like a tip, I'll definitely highlight the need to get yourself trained in 3D, because this is not only the future for fashion that exists digitally only, but also for making the traditional fashion industry more sustainable, more agile, more efficient. Everything that the 3D, all the benefits that 3D digital product creation brings. And also for the fashion brands to look at games less as a marketplace, as a merchandise activation point or brand strategy, and look on how to make the gaming experience or the metaverse more fun, less maybe capitalist, let's say, and yeah, and put the gamer, their target audience on the center of everything they do, and not the brand or extending what they do already in the physical world and the luxury space into the metaverse or gaming space.
Exactly. I think you almost answered one of the questions that we had. We don't have enough time to get all the questions from the Q&A, but someone already asked about what's the meaning of what's the point of digital fashion, and I think you got in a very interesting way, making things on the metaverse prettier or more smart and have more identity and a way of to us to express ourselves in a much more smart way.
Yeah, untethered from the physical world. Yeah,
exactly. I think we can continue to talk, but I think it's enough for today. We are all invited to different talks. We can continue that in another time. But thank you so much for this last hour. It was so great to have you here on this panel. And thank you for all those who are watching and contributing to this. So the conversation is not stopping here. If you missed any part of our webinar, you can watch the recording on our website, on YouTube. It will be available in just a few hours on the digitalfashionGroup.academy. And please add to your calendars that we continue the debate about the metaverse and the future of fashion on November the 5th, a Friday. And this new webinar is bringing, again, key players of our market to discuss the future of fashion design. So hope to see you all there. Thank you so much. Have you all a great weekend. Thank you.